Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you joining us from different parts of the world. Welcome to Transform Me's Leaders Cafe. My name is Gatik Georgia, and I'm the co founder of Transform Me Learning. The Leaders Cafe is an initiative we got onto about a year back with a very clear mission to bring conversations that matter. And this particular Leaders Cafe is extra special for me for two reasons. Reason number one is really the topic of this conversation, the business of storytelling. Storytelling is a personal passion area for me, for those of you who know me, and it's also part of Transform Me's mission for the last 11 years in transforming the way leaders inspire, engage, and influence. A journey we got into 11 years back with storytelling work that we've now done for over 200 companies across the world. The second reason I'm super excited about this particular Leaders Cafe is because of the special guest that we have joining us today, a gentleman who needs no introduction and somebody who's often referred to as the storyteller and the story seller. I'm going to bring him up in a little while. But first, for those of you who are not part of the Transform Me community yet, we are a 11-year-old, or I should say 11-year young leadership development company operating out of India and Australia. And we are on a mission to transform leaders and people in the workplace. And we do that through four specific areas that we help our clients in, that we have expertise in. The first one is leadership, leadership development for three tiers, whether it's emerging leaders, mid level managers, or senior leaders of organizations, whether it's workshops, programs, journeys, labs, or coaching. We do it all. And that's the largest segment that we serve our clients with. The second space that we operate in and help our clients with is the space of inclusion, where we do some really exciting work with clients like Google, Accenture, and many others, specifically running some very exciting women professional development programs. The third area for us is top team alignment, what you see there as synergizing strengths. A lot of work here with startup and scale up companies, helping the leadership team really align together. And finally, the fourth one, which is the reason you are here and I'm here today, which is the work that we do around storytelling. So that's a little bit, and I'm not going to take too much of your time because I know you're waiting for something special. And this is the moment, this is the time to get the man of the moment with us, Mr. Roshan Abbas. Welcome, 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 Roshan. Roshan is a gentleman most of you, all of you would have heard of, would have seen, most likely heard of. His voice is infectious. We've heard his voice, we listen to his voice, and we know it's him. He dons many, many, many hats, and I cannot do justice to introducing him. And you know, he's an entrepreneur. He's an author. He's a TV and radio host, podcaster, producer, angel investor, so much more, and a beautiful human being amongst all of these things. Something I gathered from the quick chat that we had off stage earlier, Roshan. Thank you so
Thank,
much, Roshan, for joining us today.
thank you, Gatik. It's really wonderful to be here. And, when I got to know of Transform Me and all the work that you do, I was even more excited because as story sellers, we have to evangelize what we do so often. And no better place to do that than with somebody like you who's been talking about it, who's been obviously a pioneer in the field. So, very, very delighted to be here.
That's those words sound so beautiful to my ears coming from you, Roshan. Thanks for that. This is a bit of a fan moment for me as well, Roshan. So really excited, and I'm really curious about how this conversation is going to go, and that's the best part about conversations like this. I know, a lot of our viewers would be from different parts of the world, and they've gotten on board this LinkedIn Live right now to listen to you, to listen to your perspectives around business storytelling. And you know, there's so much I want to ask you. There's so much I want to validate. There's so much perspectives that I want to get from you. But, I may start off by asking you about some of the myths around storytelling that may exist in the workspace, right? And because we work a lot with organizations, as do you, Roshan, in helping their leaders become better storytellers in the way they present, have conversations, so on and so forth. But there's so many myths that are around storytelling that exist. And I'd love to get your view on what are some of the big myths that you may want to bust or you may want to add a perspective to when it comes to storytelling in the workplace.
No, I think that's a wonderful place to start because very often storytellers are relegated to being those people who are possibly entertaining you, not being able to do something which is relevant. I mean, it would be looked on as somebody who's filling time. I think that's the biggest myth to burst because people believe, oh, it's only for marketing or it's for advertising. People believe that does it have any effectiveness in business? Of course, there is a big myth that it's time consuming. It's not something that can be learned. Either you're a natural storyteller or you're not. And I think the biggest myth with businesses is does it have any business relevance? And which is why I differentiate the word storyteller and story seller. When you're using a story to sell something, whether it is a vision, whether it is a strategy, whether it is the competence of an organization, whether it is your own reputation. You, when you introduced Transform Me, first used the word old and then you said 11 years young. In that phrase itself, there is a story because suddenly you have converted Transform Me into a young organization, and immediately youth attaches to it vibrancy, energy, and that's a very small way in which you have already started guiding the narrative. I often, when I have to be in front of audiences, have to choose what version of myself I am presenting because there are so many versions. So if I'm making a professional presentation to Coca Cola, the story that I start with very often is saying the founder and creator of Asia's best intellectual property and festival, because that suddenly gives me relevance. When I am in front of school children or college children, sometimes I'm just there talking to them, I use the more lighter one, which says, I've been on stage since I was 4 years old and I never got off. Now, that is a story by itself. So I'm saying that it's very important for people to realize that storytelling can make you wholesome, can be used to effectively communicate so many things. And many people think the myth largely is it's only for marketing and advertising, it's not effective, it's time consuming, it can't be learned, and that it doesn't have business relevance. And I think all of those myths can be easily busted.
I love what you said, specifically about the first thing that you said about storytelling being viewed as an entertaining act rather than an influencing act, right? And I think that's really the shift that you're talking about. And because Roshan, clearly amongst many other hats that you've donned, you are an entrepreneur, you are an angel investor, you've got several business interests, you've run very successful companies and continue to run them, and therefore you've applied this at the workplace and outside, so you kind of bring both those perspectives. And when I heard you speak about that entertaining bit, it brought to my mind, one of the conversations that I was having with a client, an HR leader, and the conversation kind of got into this space around storytelling, entertainment, and it's really about the balance between style and substance, isn't it? I think sometimes we get enamored by the sexiness and the style of storytelling, and that's the only bit that people may be seeing. But there's so much of substance that you can drive through storytelling, like the example you gave with the presentation to a company like Coke versus when you're speaking to kids. The context just completely changes everything, right? That's wonderful. I'm gonna take a cue on that entertaining bit. um one more bit that I wanted to check in with you, and this has been a personal one for me as well. This is a question I used to struggle to answer 11 years back when I started off storytelling training and coaching for clients. Now I think I've learned a little bit and still learning. And the question really is around, we see some people as great storytellers, right? Whether it's a Steve Jobs or anybody else that you think of in that space, right? And very often I have people that I'm coaching or talking to bring up this question that, these are people who are born with it, right? I'm not. So why should I even try? right? And that becomes kind of a barrier and an obstacle when you're already benchmarking yourself against somebody who you see as a brilliant storyteller. And part of the answer that I give often is around the difference between the art of storytelling and the science of storytelling. But what's your view on that, Roshan, in terms of, and also for our viewers who are watching this, I'm sure several of them are interested and keen on becoming good storytellers or investing in that for their organizations. What would be your message around how much of it is art, how much of it is science? Can it be learned? What's your take on that, Roshan?
So I'll take the example of Steve Jobs that you gave. Many people think that Steve Jobs was such a master presenter. But once somebody had shown me a YouTube channel which showed Steve Jobs practicing before those big addresses he used to do at the Apple campus to people. And he was a stickler from the light coming on at the right time to the phrase to the slide to the music. And if you see that channel, you will see that a master storyteller like him would spend hours practicing what you have done. I often give people another example, which is that you have spent maybe months or weeks putting together the strategy or presentation that you're going to make in front of people. How much time have you actually put in working on presenting it? Now, this is where you need to be able to find the skill, which is practicing storytelling, learning the techniques, learning the principles. Storytelling has its own principles. A great story has a great hook. A great story looks almost like the hanger which we hang our clothes on. So I often tell people that you're about to hang your entire presentation, your entire vision, your entire mission on an hanger. And what does that hanger have? It needs to have a unique hook to bring the audience in. It needs to have what we typically call, a protagonist, which could be you, which could be the company, which could be a salesperson, which could be any individual. It needs to have an obstacle, which is why the stakes in a story. Oh my God, how will they overcome this? Oh my God, how will this problem be taken care of? And then it needs to have a goal, which is what people normally leave with. Now, this is the most simple format of storytelling. Of course, there are many more formats that are there. But if you really want to be a master storyteller, it is a skill that can be acquired. It requires you to analyze storytelling structures, look at the narratives, look at effective storytellers. In a screenplay writing class that I attended with a very famous filmmaker, he said that don't just watch the movie, read the screenplay so you can see the difference between what was on paper and what was translated. Similarly, looking at great storytellers, you can pick up hints and tips. You must also be very, very aware of who is your audience. A very big part of storytelling is being able to read the room, being able to listen and know who your audience is going to be. So I think that's a very important aspect as well. And to anybody who feels that, oh, storytelling cannot be learned, every child heard stories when we were growing up from our teachers, from our parents. None of them did a class in storytelling. They learned it. They learned it on the job. They learned it from you. They learned having communication with you. So I think that is the very, very important aspect that is needed for people to really get a sense of storytelling. And it's definitely something that people can acquire and learn.
And I think that just kind of adds up to the first point that you also shared about changing our mindset around storytelling, about entertainment versus, you know, using storytelling to inspire or influence, number one. And number two, as you shared that video about Steve Jobs, and that's so true, right? We see these, great storytellers and people who go up on stage and create magic. And we feel that they're being spontaneous. I often quote, I say that, for me, the definition of spontaneity is equal to rehearsed practice, right? But that's what you're alluding to, right, Roshan? That there's so much that goes behind the scenes, and you can learn it, provided you're willing to change your mindset around storytelling and take a more learner's approach to storytelling. And I must share this with you, Roshan, because it triggered a thought in my head when you spoke about Steve Jobs and preparation and entertainment and all of this. I was I was in a workshop with some managers a while back, and it started off 1 hour into the session, and this gentleman raised his hand and he said, "Look, I'm always telling stories. I'm a pretty good storyteller, right? But it wasn't so much about I want to learn. It was about, do we really need to learn storytelling? We all know storytelling kind of thing. And he was right, perhaps, because we all do. And those are times when I feel like, and I drive the difference between what I call pub storytelling and business storytelling, right? These are the anchors that we use in Transform Me also, right? Pub storytelling and business storytelling. And pub storytelling, like you said, Roshan, is really about telling a story because you want to tell a story just to entertain, right? There's no planning, there's no structure, there's no preparation, there's no key message. You're just in the moment telling a story. And because we all do that, we may think that that's what business storytelling is, but business storytelling is so different. Like you said, there are different structures, there are different formats. There's got to be a dilemma, there's going to be an outcome, there's preparation in that, and you can be good provided you look at the science and the structure around it. Yeah, yeah, really nice to hear that, Roshan. And to all our viewers, I'm seeing some wonderful comments coming for you, Roshan, which is beautiful to see. And just reminding our viewers that we will have 5, 7, 10 minutes at the end for some Q&A with Roshan, questions that you have. So if you have questions, please keep popping them up. We may not take them now, but we will use the last 5, 10 minutes to address some of your questions and get Roshan's perspective on them. Um, Roshan, I want to hear some of your examples and your stories, right? And I'm sure you've got plenty of your own anecdotes and experiences with storytelling. But since we are talking about business storytelling and the business of storytelling, could you perhaps share with me and with all of our viewers some examples of how storytelling has been effectively used in business to create a lasting impact? Whether you've used it or you've seen it being used, just some examples from you would be super helpful.
No, I very often try and tell people not just stories, which are my own personal stories, because obviously I have my entire trade and art has been communication, storytelling. So it's something I do on a daily basis. And very often, when I would be in a room talking about Encompass, which was my event agency, I needed in very little time to be able to convince the person sitting on the other side that we had the ability to execute the vision that we had presented, that we had experience, that we had knowledge, that we had the team to deliver it. Now, these were the kind of messages I wanted to land. So, what I would always do, which was a very interesting slide I even today use, is when I enter a presentation, I start with a slide which says, "Since we last met." And then I would put down saying, since we last met, we did the IPL opening ceremony across 8 cities in 3 weeks, which involved all of India and a team of over 1,000 individuals. Since we last met, we had, at that point in time, I remember we had Andre Agassi who had come down to make a unique presentation for one of the brands that we worked with. Since we last met, we created an anthem for one of the leading banks in India with a person like Gulzar. Now, these were very simple methods for me to show our reputation, our experience, our expertise, our delivery. These are very small. I call these small S storytelling, which is more anecdotal, very short, but they land a point home. Let's not talk about me. Let's talk about companies that you all would know about, which are completely different. General Electric, some years ago, was going through a point where they said they're not being relevant anymore. General Electric took to making 2 podcasts, and I would really recommend if you listen to them. These were fictional stories. One of the stories called The Message became one of the most popular podcasts of the year because it talked about innovation and technology using GE's example, bringing it to the narrative and lifting GE into popular culture. Suddenly, people were discussing this technology that they had got. Multiple companies like Accenture, Deloitte, EY are doing things from podcasts. So EY has a podcast called Better Questions. Now, what are they doing here? They're talking to leaders and experts, getting their stories out, and therefore saying, look, we have access, we have great information, we are able to bring all of these stories together, and this is the crux of the knowledge and value that you would end up getting from an Ernst & Young. When various companies publish reports about the future of work or the skills to succeed, etc., you will find that they are humanizing themselves, making themselves a lot more accessible to people. And that is very, very important for the person you're communicating with to get to know more about you. If you looked at popular brands, Amul never talks about the butter. Amul always talks about what is pertinent and happening currently and places that mascot which they created so many years ago, which is in the Guinness Book of World Records, by the way, for being one of the longest running brand campaigns ever. But they're using the art of storytelling to communicate something which is as functional as butter. What is butter going to do except add perhaps a moment of delight to your morning? But because it's your morning, because it's relevant, because it is immediate, by being topical and newsy, they have connected the product and storytelling. So there are so many examples. I mean, Gatik, I could just keep going on for hours for this. So I'll stop myself here. But those are just some examples I thought I would share with
No, that is so super helpful. And when you started using examples of brands, I couldn't help but remember a time when I was walking up on the stage in a World Storytelling Congress, and this was 2016 or something. And the speaker just before me was the late Sir Alec Padamsee, and he was such a, I mean, prolific storyteller. And he went on stage and he actually shared the story of what was it? I think Nirma, right? And he
you.
spoke about how they changed the complete narrative from price to value just by using the power of storytelling, right? And I loved some of the things you said. One, I love that small tip that you've already shared with some of our viewers around since we last met, just having kind of that anchor to, that's so beautiful. If I'm gonna piggyback on that, Roshan. I'm gonna give
Please,
credit where it's due, but I may use that in some of my presentation. I love that. It's such a nice way to kind of position it, right, since we last met. And the other bit that you spoke about, humanizing, and that's so important, not to lose the authenticity while you're storytelling, right? And actually, rather than not lose the authenticity, leverage the power of authenticity to humanize those conversations and those interactions.
Gatik, what happens very often is the other thing that I often get asked, and I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but it's just to give you another pertinent example.
Please.
But it is that data. So many people come and say, but I'm a finance person, I have to talk about data. I have to talk about
Right.
numbers. What will stories do with me? And I give them another example, which is that I was working with an automobile company which was making tractors. And they were like, the finance guy came and said, we made maybe 500,000 tractors which were sold. And I turned and said, okay, for a second, 500,000 tractors being sold would have plowed how many fields? How much wheat must have been produced from it? And this person suddenly said, oh, I never thought of it like that. And then they thought about it. And I said, if suppose X amount of kilograms of wheat was produced, how many mouths did it feed? And suddenly he had a smile on his face and he said, I never thought that what I am doing is so relevant. And I said, but it is. You're not just selling a tractor because it's going to stand parked in someone's house. It is going to change the face of the nation. It is going to make so many more people self sufficient. It is going to feed so many people. And suddenly the entire perspective changed. So, this is where even things like data can be converted into stories. And that is what I really feel people need to understand.
I was already seeing some conversations around storytelling and data coming up, some questions, Roshan. You picked it up so beautifully. And you're so right. One is authenticity, and the other is using storytelling and data. And how do you make numbers meaningful, right? That's really the question. Otherwise, anybody can talk data and numbers. And I remember watching this video of Steve Jobs, and I use this in our training programs where he's talking and he's explaining to his team, right? It's an internal video. He's explaining to his team about how they want to position something. And this was the time when they had the what do you call it, the music listening device that Apple had, the iPod. See, we've already forgotten about the iPod, right? So the iPod, right? So it was one of the first versions of the iPod, Roshan, and his marketing team was telling him that it has 10 gigabytes of data or something like that, right? I may be misquoting the exact figure. And he said, but what does that do? Right? That data is meaningless. And the person asked him, what do you mean? He said, I'll tell you how I'm going to say it. It has 10 gigabytes of data, which means you can listen to music on your way to the moon and back. Now suddenly you made that number meaningful, right? And that's so true, because sometimes we think that storytelling and data cannot kind of go together, but in essence they have to.
I mean, to take the same example and even just to give another view on it, another simpler way is 10 gigabyte of data is equal to 10,000 of your favorite songs. It's equal to
Ah,
10,000 of your favorite memories and pictures. It is
there
equal
you go.
to thousands of contacts you can connect with. Now, suddenly, that hard drive has taken on such a soft value. That's what
Absolutely,
we want.
absolutely. Yeah, and I like how you were able to spontaneously pick that up and pick up different angles of presenting the same data, right?
That's what I keep telling people that, "Ore, aapko aata hai." I said, "Nee, it's not that mujhko aata hai. You must understand, I've spent 30 years building stories, and not just building stories. One thing which people do not do, and I must say this is something I say with a lot of pride, I preserve every story I tell. Currently, it lies in my phone in notes. But if I was to type motivation in my notes, I would find 20 stories and quotes and jokes. And if I typed, success, I would find the same. So meta tag your stories. When you've told a story, if you have friends, in college, when you had a great bunch of friends, it's always great to be able to tell the story to a few friends. And if you can do this, make a small group, make 4 friends in your office. Say, listen, once a week, we will meet for a cup of tea or coffee or a beer, and we will exchange stories. But we will not just exchange stories, we will make it into something which is an activity people look forward to. This week we
Uh,
will exchange stories on success. This week we will talk about stories of change. This week we will talk of stories of struggle. People will be reticent. Initially, you will find a lot of hesitation. People won't do it. But if you follow through, and the important thing is following through. If you follow through and you build this little club, you will be the richest person in this world, because you will have stories for every moment, every opportunity. When you finish telling a story, ask the people on a piece of paper to write what are the 3 messages they got from the story. This is called meta tagging. Every piece of data on the web is meta tagged, which is why it is so easy to find. But stories require meta tagging as well. What aspect is the story? Is this a positive story, or is it a story that has a serious end? Because sometimes you might need the opposite as well. So, if you do this as a practice, believe you me, it is an investment that is going to pay you for a lifetime.
that's so true, Roshan. If I can just build on that, but because I'm just feeling so much resonance in the work that you do. Um, I often tell people that storytelling is the easy part of storytelling, right? The more challenging part, or the real bit, is story crafting, because you're only as good a storyteller as the stories you have, right? If you don't have stories to tell, what are you going to tell? And I think the real skill that people need to learn, and what we also try to focus on, is how do you craft stories? How can you learn to use your experiences and your incidents in your life and craft them? And I recommend to people, exactly like you said, Roshan, create a story bank, right? And what you're talking about, meta tagging, is really about what is the key message of each story, right? And how do you kind of put those together? And it's funny you said this, because uh, I started saying that we need to start with the definition of a story. And I say, what's a story? And people give different definitions of a story. Some people say it's a parable, it's a fable, it's that. And then I just show on the slide, and it's still a slide that I have with me. I just say story is equal to an experience, a real specific incident. At least in the business workplace, where at least we recommend not to use too many parables and fables, but to use real life experiences. And, if you ask anybody, I look at people and I say, how many experiences have you had in life? They're like, what do you mean? I said, how many experiences have you had in life? They said, right, we don't get your question. I said, okay, how many times have you failed? How many of you have failed? They raise their hands, right? How many of you have been successful? How many of you have taken a risk and it's paid off, not paid off? Those are all stories waiting for you to be meta tagged, Roshan, in your language, and stored, so that you are able to pull out the rabbit out of the hat when you need it the most, kind of a thing. I loved how you spoke about the meta tag. You still do that? It's on your phone with the notes and tags, which is
Absolutely.
amazing.
Yeah. And even now, if I find a story, and now obviously, I mean, Apple has made this absolutely phenomenal thing where earlier, if you had to take a screenshot of something from a book, you would have to then type it out, etc. But now it sort of just picks out the text. So I
Right.
easily am able to do that now, or I would do it on a Kindle. But it's so important. And again, if any of you use a Kindle, one of the very interesting features in Kindle is that when you buy a book, if you go and highlight something, it will show you the most highlighted portions of the book. Now, if you see
Ah,
that, thousands of other people have already done the job for you. They've already gone and found the best moments, the best stories. They've already tagged them. Go, people. There are so many simple, hacks that you can find, Gatik.
I
I
didn't
have
know this about
often.
the Kindle. This is interesting. I use the Kindle sometimes, but this is quite interesting, fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay.
The most highlighted paragraphs are already there in a book when you buy it, and therefore it's almost like having a digital repertoire of 1,000 recommenders, right? Who've already
Wow.
recommended and told you, oh my god, this is the pertinent bit, this is the most important bit. And sometimes, like you can always just skip through those to get a very quick view of what the book might be. So these are just some ways. The other important thing is people sometimes confuse a story with rambling on, right? And it's so important to be able to know how to tell what I keep saying is a small s and a big S story. If any of you has the time, please go online, look at the hero's journey. It's originally based on a book called the Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. And here it very clearly illustrates what are the almost like a clock's wheel and tells you all the moments in a story. And if you will look at it, whether it's the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, whether it is Lagan or Superman, whether it is Matrix or Lion King, I mean, you name it, Bahubali, etc., etc. All of these films follow the big S storytelling, epic storytelling, as we call it. Small S storytelling is what I just told you. Start with a little bit of a hook which gets the person in. Then you say, who's the protagonist? What's the obstacle? What's the goal? It's as simple as that, right? I could just turn and say, for example, I'm talking to you. Suddenly there's a bell at the door. Now that's the obstacle. Will I go and solve it, not solve it? Is it important enough to the audience? Those are the stakes. Oh my God, the house is on fire and I suddenly need to leave this conversation. The stakes have been raised. Oh my God, suddenly somebody walks in here with their hand cut and it's an emergency and I need to attend to it. The stakes have been raised. That's the obstacle. The goal is very simple. We're having a conversation which we need to conclude. Now, this is the simplest form of storytelling. Once you have got all your stories and you've found what's the obstacle, what's the goal, who's the protagonist, what's my hook, if you can find this in any story, you're safe. Then start building on things like visual cues, emotions, description, scenic settings, etc., etc. And of course, constantly realizing in the goal, what's the message you want to land. Now, these are very important to do. Otherwise, very often people start rambling, don't know where a story begins, don't know where it ends. And this very often dilutes the power of a story. And then they run away saying, oh, I don't know how to tell a story. No, you know how to tell a story. There's a very simple rule that I tell people, which is called write, read, reduce, repeat. So write out the story.
Write,
The first
read,
time you write it out,
reduce, repeat.
carburetors say, kachra nikalta hai, my dad used to say.
Mm.
In the old days when you used to have scooters. So initially, don't play. Your first draft will not be your best draft, but it will be possibly your most honest draft. Then, once you've written it, read it. Oh my God, I could do away with this. Again, this is a very nice exercise. Write a page, reduce it to a para, reduce it to a line. If you can do either of these techniques, you will find the crux of a story, the nichode of a story, the real elixir which lies within a story. And once you've got that, you can decide how much you want to expand depending on the time available.
Yeah, yeah, and again, beautiful points. And I loved what you said about the struggle of rambling on. A struggle that, of course, you've seen. I mean, I've struggled with it. I still struggle with it sometimes, but it's something that we coach people on and train people on, and it's so beautiful, Roshan. And I use this analogy often, just to build on what you said about you know telling a story like rambling on is like flying a plane where the pilot is sitting and you climb. I think I shared it with you, right? You climb onto the plane and you look at the pilot and you say, "Where are we flying to?" And the pilot says, "We'll go somewhere." You say, "Okay, how long are we going to be in the air for?" He says, "I'll see till as long as I have the fuel." Where are we going to land? I don't know, wherever I find a good airstrip. Now that's just rambling on. You don't know the start, you don't know the end, you don't know how long you're going to be in the air for, versus having a flight plan chalked out and knowing, like you said, what are the different parts of the story. And that is such a trainable skill. Love that. And,
To put
I noticed there was.
sorry, to put what you said in a funny anecdote, I often used to turn and say, telling a story is like drilling for gold, right? If you haven't struck gold quickly, stop boring. Like
Stop boring. I love that. Stop boring. Love that. Love that. And there was a question that came up, and there's so many comments that are coming in. I missed the question, who the question was from, and I may pick that up later. But there was a question that came, which is kind of connected to what you were talking about, Roshan, a while back, and I have a perspective on that. I'll pick up the question first, share my perspective, and love to hear yours. And the question really was that when you're using storytelling in the business context, in the work context, should you? The question was to the extent of, should you look at uh, the end first and then figure out the story, or vice versa. That was kind of the question, the essence. And my perspective on that in the work that we've been doing, Roshan, is that in business storytelling, definitely, which is different from pub storytelling, you need to know your key message, right? Which is what we focus on. You need to know where you want to land that plane, right? And once you've got that clear, then you kind of backtrack and use a story or craft a story that can land on that message. That's at least my perspective, but love to hear what is your perspective, and also could serve as an answer to the question that was raised.
so Gatik, if it is for a specific, occasion, absolutely, as you said, first figure out what do I want to land. I want to tell these people this has been a tough year. Okay. But I also want to tell them we're going to come out from this. Therefore, I should tell them a story of a struggle that, when done together, delivered something. So, therefore, what you're doing is you're putting a sieve. You're almost taking a
Hmm.
sieve and saying, all my stories will go through this, and what will remain will be the ones that will service this particular end. If you're doing a open storytelling session, when you're doing it by yourself, come up with whatever stories you can. There is a lovely book called The Artist's Way, which I always recommend to people. It's written by Julia Cameron. It has two beautiful habits that it asks you to inculcate. One is to write 3 pages by hand every morning. And I know that in this highly digital age, people will find that strange, but there is a joy to writing by the hand. And I'm telling you, there is some old prehistoric connection between our brain and our hand that when you write, it sort of clarifies your thoughts. I like doing that. And if you write 3 pages every morning, you don't need to write with a specific story or whatever in mind. After a couple of days of writing pure rubbish, and you could write rubbish like, I woke up, I saw this, and slowly, once those thoughts go, the other bits will start coming. This is if storytelling is going to be a practice you will do constantly. Then take these stories, put them on little flashcards, and if you can, place them on a wall, place them on a board behind you. Then start picking them and bunching them together. These are all stories of optimism. These are all stories of hope. These are stories which land the following message. But that is if you're actually building a story reservoir. If you're looking for a
Hmm.
story for a particular moment, exactly what you said, figure out the message, use that as the sieve through which you will pass all the stories you know. And one important thing, all stories do not need to be personal stories. All stories do not need to be someone else's stories. There can be a mix of both, as long as you're telling them with a certain amount of honesty and authenticity. This is a
Yeah.
very important thing. When people start, again, the difference between rambling on, the difference between that big phrase of, oh, they're a tall tale teller, oh, ye to
Hmm.
फेंक रहे हैं, to use the Indian phrase. Those are things to be careful of, because there needs to be an authenticity. The story needs to be grounded in some truth. Otherwise, it comes across as a tall tale.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've so beautifully touched on this important point. What I'm at least getting from what you said, Roshan, is really, there's no one right answer. It really depends on that big C that I call the context. The context will just kind of determine the kind of story, the level of authenticity, the length of the story, whether you begin with the end of mind or not. And I think that's such a beautiful point, because even we are strong believers in that. We've in fact created something, and I'll share with you later if we talk, something called the triple loop formula, which is really about working with the context, then getting to the key message, then getting to the story, rather than the other way around, which is what most people end up doing. Now, I know we're getting a lot of interesting questions on the screen, and we're about to get into some questions, Roshan, to get your perspectives on. But I do have one last question that I want to ask you for the sake of our community, because I know it's a question that would be on many people's minds and they would love to hear your view on it. So, this is going to be the last question from my side, and then we're going to pick up some questions. And my team has already sorted out some questions that we could pick up. Um, the last question I have for you, Roshan, is what advice, what suggestion would you give to either individuals or businesses who want to start using storytelling at the workplace? Where should they begin? What could they do?
So I think this is the most perfect way that you could possibly have closed this, because where do you begin is perhaps the biggest question that people have. What I would suggest is, if it's being done at a leadership level within a company, I really feel that almost getting your teams together and telling them first, ideally with a professional, ideally getting someone into the room who has some idea of the art and the craft, somebody who's inspirational, somebody who can leave them with something that is deliverable. That's a good place to start. There are enough and more resources available online. Many are available for free. Many coaching, there are leadership coaching. I mean, Gatik himself has told you about the work that they do. I myself do a couple of workshops, but really, I would say you can always start by finding a mentor or somebody who can be your guide. This could be, if you're keen to do something which is pre-recorded, there are so many courses available online. If you like it to be in person, it's also a possibility. A simpler thing, okay, you don't have the resources, you don't want to do any of this, is go and just Google the best stories in business, the best personal leadership stories. Read, read. If you don't feed your imagination, you will not come out with something. Guy Kawasaki, who was the chief evangelist for Apple, had a wonderful line which he used to say. He used to say, "Eat like a bird, poop like an elephant." And that sounded really strange, because eat like a bird. But a bird, actually, if you look at its size, eats a hell of a lot. A hen keeps pecking at things all day. How many stories are you pecking at? How many of them are you picking up? That's important. Poop like an elephant. Again, oh my God, an elephant, it shits so much. Sorry to leave this scatological image with everybody, but I'm sure it's something that will stick with you. But by its body size, the amount that it absorbs is a lot more than the amount it lets out. So eat a lot, absorb a lot. Consume a lot of stories, absorb them. Try to look at regular stories that you like. Oh, I love the story of Steve Jobs coming back to his company and making it work. Why do you like that story? Ask yourself that question. Oh, it's because it speaks to the inner person in me, which says, if there's a struggle, you'll come out. This is a great way of talking about a struggle. Then apply it to your person. Have I had a personal struggle worth talking about? Is it something worth sharing? This worth sharing is a very important thing, because everybody thinks either they are very uninteresting or they think they are very interesting. You actually need to find that median in between. Is this something worthwhile, worth sharing? Will it leave people with something of consequence? I think that is an important barometer to have. And there are so many other things that I have already told you, but again, I will tell you this. Try that exercise. Try to write out 3 pages every morning. If you can't write three, write one. If you can't write one, write a paragraph. Take notes. Look around your environment. There are stories everywhere. We are all billboards which have got 100 stories within us. Even our profiles are billboards. I must tell you, I try to change my work profile, etc., once every couple of months with a little story, with a little thing, just 2 lines on something. And people respond. People want to know more. We are curious. We are trained to transmit knowledge, learning, morals, values through stories. And this has been done for millions of years. So you've got, the world on your side when you're telling stories, because that's the one way we've learned how to communicate. So all the best on your storytelling journey. I'm sure you'll have a great beginning.
Yeah, I again really admire the way you put it all together around the question was around what is the start point, and you've actually shared with the community, Roshan, several start points that exist. And hire an expert, get a free expert, do something, do it on your own. And if I boil it all down, to me, it is if you want to become a good storyteller, stop dreaming and start doing. Get into action, do something, get an expert, start writing down, do something. I think that's beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Roshan, for sharing that perspective. So, time for some questions now, Roshan. And let's have the first question, please. Let's see which one we're going to be starting off with. Okay, I see one here that I'm going to pick up, Roshan. We have a question from Luca Terhorst. In what situations would you use storytelling? Quite a broad question, Roshan, but I'm sure there is a certain context that Luca has. So, your perspectives, and keeping the theme of business of storytelling, perhaps from a workplace, what kind of situations can we use storytelling in?
So actually, there are possibly, Luca. Thank you for the question. There are multiple ways in which you could be using it. If you are entering a place where you are meeting a lot of people for the first time, a story could be used as an introduction in building common ground. Very often, it's building common ground that is important in building a human relationship. So imagine you're at a conference and you're standing in a line with someone, and if there was even a line for coffee. Oh my God, reminds me of the time. Immediately it gets a little bit of a resonance or whatever. So storytelling can be used as a great context setting, can be used as an introduction. In many presentations, stories are used to build a human connect around whatever you are delivering. You could be doing something that is going to change the face of humanity. But I often turn and say people want to know about that one individual. If you were doing something, say, for example, which is going to change old age homes, people want to know about the 72-year-old person whose life will change. It's better to talk about individuals and humanize facts using stories. So again, stories. Frankly, it's a question is so broad that I believe stories can be used to handle any situation as such. But these are a couple of thoughts that I could share with you.
Thanks, Roshan. And I was just sifting through the questions that we have here, and we have quite a few. I realized that you've already answered quite a few. So the question that I was kind of alluding to earlier, Roshan, about thinking of the outcome first or the story, which you've already answered, was a question from Bhabani Sankar Hota. So I hope you've got your answer from Roshan on that. There's also another question around storytelling with data that came in from a LinkedIn user, and you've spoken at great length about that and answered that. The next one I'd perhaps bring in is a question from Stuti Khanduri, and it's a beautiful question. How do we where do we draw the line between getting creative and being realistic? Right? Stories can be quite flamboyant. What if you paint a picture that's too good to be true and then it doesn't live up to it? How do you kind of balance that in the workplace as a leader, as a manager, using a story?
Uh, Again, a great question. And I think authenticity is something that I spoke about earlier. And I definitely think that it's a very important aspect that you must always look at when you're telling a story. The, you know, Again, there are two schools of thought on this. Somebody once said that, don't let a little bit of, don't let a lie take away from a good story. But somehow I feel that in business context, particularly today, where everything can be authenticated, can be checked. At one time, advertising used to make the tallest claims, but today they are called out so often because people have access and have information. I would always err on the side of being factual, making sure that I'm talking from personal experience. I'm talking of something that can be validated. That is very, very important to do. Yes, emotional resonance sometimes can be built by bringing in a little bit of hyperbole. Let me give you an example. I actually once was in a business situation where if I did not deliver on the job, if my company did not deliver on the job that was given, I had signed an indemnity clause that I would have to pay twice the amount of money, which was the size of the contract, if I didn't deliver. Now, some
Wow.
people would say this was foolhardy, but at that moment in time, it was a risk that I was willing to take. I was willing to take the risk because I looked at saying, personally, because I had a career as a television anchor and as a host, and I was paid really well there. I had done it in maths in my head and said it will take me 3 years to pay back this amount if I had to work individually. So when I mention this fact, now I could turn and say it was a very difficult contract. By mentioning this fact, by making it something that is, it suddenly raises the stakes. It makes the emotional resonance a lot more. And that's what I do. But it is an authentic fact. It is a fact that can be verified. It is something that actually happened. So I think those are very important pointers to look at. Do not get lost in getting too creative. What you could get creative with is the expression, is the setting. That can, I mean, how filmmakers add drama to a scene because they're adding their vision or their lens to it. That is something which you could definitely do, but don't stray away from the facts.
Yeah. I love that perspective. And wow, that would have been a gutsy move, Roshan. Pretty gutsy
Very
move,
early in my
man.
career, very early in my career. And I often dovetail this with a quote by Winston Churchill, which is, if you're going through hell, keep going.
Keep going. Yeah, that's right. That's so right. That's so right. So I'm going to bring them. So maybe we have space for two more questions, Roshan. We're a little above time. I'm sorry for have taken more time of yours than we had anticipated, but seems like the audience has a lot more they want to get out of you. So here's a question, and it's come from two or three people about measuring return on investment on storytelling in the workplace. And I've got a perspective on that, but I'd love to hear your view on, is it even a valid question? I mean, that's what Nimit is asking. And what are your views on that, Roshan, for organizations looking at storytelling? How can they look at ROI?
Yeah, Nimit, that's a really really good question, and I do believe that that's a question that is asked by most people who are investing in storytelling by taking on someone. You can only know the ROI of something if you know what it is that you want to measure. So, for example, when I train a sales team, I am often asked, and I will often ask them, saying, currently, how many leads do you have? How many conversions do you get? And what is the problem you find? Oh, we don't have great stories to tell. We're not able to engage our customers, etc. Now I know that if I was able to turn and say, hey, your conversion rate will go up because I believe it is something that can happen, then it's a commitment that I would possibly be willing to make. In certain cases, when there is top level management involved, it becomes a very gut level decision. I'm often training people before a conference, before they're speaking to their larger staff, etc. And here, it's a lot more qualitative than quantitative. There used to be at times, of course, ways of measuring audience engagement, but those are very, very scientific. So I would not go there. But if you define your objective from the beginning, you know what I want? I want to do a survey at the end of the conference to turn and say, were our leaders a lot more relatable? Do you remember any story? So please try and build some kind of a object that you want to measure. If it is engagement, if it is relevance, if it is influence. One simple thing again, I'll tell you. Sometimes I will train a person to find a bunch of stories around themselves before they're going out and speaking to the press. How many of those stories actually make it to the press is a good way of them measuring whether those stories resonated, whether they built on relevance for the person. But again, a lot of this is about trust between the trainer and the person who's learning and between the organization. But I would definitely recommend that at least the smallest way is a post survey after the session. And if it is a team engaged in sales, etc., to look at what their efficacy was post.
Yeah, great answer, Roshan. Thanks. And if I may just add, Nimit, to what Roshan shared, um, I have learned that ROI becomes a bit tricky in many situations, and especially when you talk about a skill like storytelling. But we've been able to effectively figure out some ways of doing that, and there's specifically three ways, Nimit, in which we've tried to do that for our clients. One, and if you're looking at that for yourself or your organization, maybe consider this. Number one, you can attach storytelling to business metrics. So that's number one, hardcore business metrics. Roshan shared a great example of sales. So when we are also training people in sales, Roshan spoke about a great example. He looks at conversion. He says, we can improve the conversion. So that's hardcore metric conversion, number one. Number two, engagement, right? Now, when we do work on storytelling with senior leaders who are not really selling, for example, one of the projects that we did for a client during COVID, where they were hosting a lot of these events virtually, and their senior leaders would host virtual events. The metric that we were measuring was engagement, and pretty easy to measure. They knew what was the average time people would be viewing a leader speak out of the 15 minutes that he or she had before storytelling, and after storytelling, did it increase by 30%, 40%, 50%? So you've got that metric that you could do as well, right? The third way to do that is, at least what we do at Transform Me, is doing a simple pre and post assessment to see the behavior level change. So assess the leaders or the people that you're training on storytelling before they go through a formalized course on storytelling. Assess it afterwards and see the behavioral change. So three metrics there. You've got business, engagement, and behavior. And depending on where you are on your journey, Nimit, with yourself or your people, you could choose which one is most relevant for you. And
Nothing very, very good.
there's
I must say, I often struggle with giving these examples, but really, I must compliment you on the way you put that. I'm going to borrow that from you.
Please go for it. I'm borrowing your man likha hua hai. I should not forget since we last met. So here's the last one for you, Roshan, and I know you've got lots to share on this, but maybe top three, top five question from Lobna Komi. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. And recommendation for books to learn storytelling, Roshan.
Lobna, I wish I could just turn the camera to my library, which is just filled with books on storytelling. But if I was to tell you a couple of books, frankly, Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces is really, really a great book. It's a little heavy, so it's something which I recommend, but maybe a little later in the journey. The book, which is about how to deliver a great TED speech, also actually has some very good pointers in it, and it's something that I have recommended. I've read personally. I really like Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way. It's just a great book to understand a lot more. Robert McKee, while it's a lot more to do with film, but the book by Robert McKee about storytelling is really worth reading, because again it puts many of these things into a perspective. There are, of course, a whole plethora of books that I could be telling you about, but these are a couple that I would do. And what I'll actually do is I'll actually share a list with Gatik, and he could maybe share some more a little later, because I mean they're all over the place there. I have to just suddenly go and quickly bring out about 10 or 15 and read out the names to you.
Well, that's so thoughtful of you, Roshan. Thank you so much, and I'm sure the viewers would love to get your perspectives on that. So, folks, unfortunately, this is all the time that we had, and I know you can't get enough of Roshan, and I know that you would have wanted to engage more with him. Please engage with him on his channel and stay connected with him on his channel. Roshan, you've also launched a very beautiful Instagram initiative. I know, very interesting. I found that. I wish for people to follow you on Instagram and connect with you there as well. And do join the Transform Me tribe, the Transform Me community also, if you want to stay connected on stuff related to storytelling, related to leadership. Roshan, it's been such a pleasure to have you here. And I'm truly grateful for you to have given our community so much of your time to share your perspectives about this space that you are clearly the expert in. Thank you, Roshan.
Thank you so much, Gatik, and thank you for reaching out. I must say that from the very first email communication, which in itself is a story that I could tell later, because it was born out of one of the Instagram hacks that I had given people. So to you, to Amita, to the entire team, thank you very much. And I can really tell you that storytelling has been transformative for my life. Most everything that I have achieved has been on the back of building a great career as a storyteller and a storyteller. It can be done. It's the first step is just up to you. I do hope that you all have a storyful life, and of course, a life that is always so rich that you have many stories to tell always. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roshan. I hope when I meet you next, I start my conversation with you by saying, since we last met. I learned
Sure,
from
buddy.
you. I'm learning from the best. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Roshan.
Thank
Have
you
a
so much.
wonderful, wonderful rest of the day. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next month at Transformees Leaders Cafe. Have a good one, everyone.